Welcome to In the 661, Youth Voices for Kern, where we talk about issues facing our community, but particularly issues that face the younger members of our community. Joey Williams is with Faith in the Valley. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So Joey, let's talk about the numbers in our county. Do we have an issue with voter turnout, particularly when we talk about youth and younger people, or is it actually the opposite way around?
Well, in Kern County, we actually have there's been staggering low voter turnout. In 2014 was the lowest historically, and that number held true across the primary and the general election. Going into 2016, we saw that number jump up highly. Even though our county average is lower than the state average of voter turnout, we saw that youth actually voted at a higher rate between 18 and 35-year block in 2016 than the other demographics, and that was true across rural Kern and across Bakersfield Metro. But the 2016 election we saw a bump, but still the numbers are lower than the state average, and then the city of Bakersfield is lower than the county average, and other counties were holding true, being below the county average of how folks were turning out.
So I was going to ask you a few seconds ago, is that encouraging to you, at least that there is a trend towards a higher trend, at least in the 2016 primary and the election?
Yeah, because as I know, we as 501c3s, we don't endorse candidates or parties, but we'll see a demographic. This county voted 56% for Donald Trump in the presidential election, but we saw propositions like 55 and 57 pass here in the county for the first time. Historically, Prop 55 is an extension of Prop 30, and 57 is like a 47 type. We saw these pass in a county that voted 56% for Donald Trump. So that's encouraging because it showed that groups like ourselves and others that are out there doing this work encourage people to vote their values and their beliefs at a better rate than other folks, so cause those numbers to come up.
I mean, you're hoping, though, just in general to increase participation, right? I mean, your feeling is that some people feel disenfranchised, that they're not voting because they have nothing to vote for.
One thing is that we've seen historically, as we talk about the lawsuit with MalDef, historically, suppression, gerrymandering has held communities of color down from voting. But not only that, on top of those suppression efforts, we saw people really don't have a reason to vote. Candidates come through in 6 weeks, they promise a lot, they don't really deliver on these things, whether Republican or Democrat. But what we saw with things like 55 and 57, when the candidate is actually you, because it's going to be your kid who's going to get that money, it changes things. When we have those conversations at the door, is folks are like, I didn't know that this money, I didn't know that the DA, sheriff, and the supervisors, 4 out of our 5 county supervisors were elected in the primary, but the primaries have the lowest turnout, right? So how are we making the importance of the primary elections and the general elections key so that folks know that with all these monies that get handed down, county supervisors make these decisions of where they go? And the DA has immense power over mass incarceration. We know that we have a school-to-prison pipeline. We just settled a lawsuit with the Kern High School District about discrimination and disproportionate suspension expulsions, about changing school climate on restorative justice and second chances to end this pipeline, right? So we know that the DA has immense power over who's getting sentenced and charged and going to prison, right? And how we are implementing second chance and even independent review of officer-involved shootings. They have the power to do that, but what we've heard with both candidates that we've been able to meet with is that there's no money for it. So let's get out there and create the money, right? And that's exciting for people, not necessarily supporting a candidate, but about the types of money and things that folks can do as a DA and as a sheriff. We know, there's no secret that our sheriff has not been a friend to immigrants here in the county. He's just been with Jeff Sessions yesterday, the day before, talking about being tougher on immigration. I think the county, we were part of leading the charge, resoundingly rejected the sheriff's non-sanctuary proposal to the board. The board rejected it, and we are moving forward as a state and as a county, counties that are fully engrafted immigrants as a part of our fabric and our life, which includes our youth, our undocumented youth, and that we're contributing and we're moving forward in this robust California economy, and that type of politics. It's not accepted, not just in California, but even here with our young people.
Well, let's ask that because, you talked about your conversation with the DA. I want to get a little bit more into that in a few seconds in the candidate discussion because we have 2 people running for that position, as Lisa Green has decided not to run for re-election. The sheriff's position, at least from what I've heard through media reporting, is that his job is to uphold the law as law enforcement.
Yeah.
So his position has been, if you're here illegally, my job is to uphold the law in immigration.
Yeah. So,
and this is the recent discussion about what took place with, raids up north in Northern California with an elected official kind of tipping off people. He said, look, that's not what you're supposed to do if you're part of law enforcement, if you're part of the system of maintaining and creating laws, you have to go by the law, whether you like the law or not.
Yeah. And what we have here is it's a false narrative. We know historically, the LA Times reported that crime is at an all-time low. 17 News just put out a piece that crime in Kern County is at an all-time low. We have this narrative that Prop 47 and 57 is putting criminals back out on the streets. We know from facts that all crime, 3% of all are committed by citizens. Only 1% of crimes are committed by immigrants. So we have like the citizen population doubling the amount of crimes that are committed, but we still have this narrative that immigrants are criminals. Now, if we want to talk about the law and order, let's talk about law and order. State law, which, Donnie Youngblood is a sheriff in the state of California, right, is that, we know there's countless violations where he, as I mentioned before, he hasn't signed off on U visas, which are federal law, because he said he don't think that people should be able to stay here just because they were a victim of a crime or domestic violence. You're making a judgment call on something that George Bush authored right before 9/11, the U visa law in 2000. So it's selective on how you're enforcing these laws because you don't think it's that important, but you think this one is. And there's been several violations of the Truth and Trust Act where you're not allowed to tell ICE that somebody is in the jail, but once they were released, have called them and said, hey, so-and-so is driving away from the jail or that they're walking down the street. We have countless stories of this from the ACLU and ourselves and partners where this has happened. So there's always gray areas, but it's always selective. But as St. Augustine said, and Martin Luther King said, an unjust law is no law at all. The laws are arbitrary. The people decide what they're going to enforce and what they're not going to enforce. But we really, we would hope that our sheriff and the candidates coming up, whoever our next sheriff is, would, adopt the resounding sentiment of our communities and rural communities that, immigrants are, one, human beings, dignity worthy of respect, and to be able to make a living, and at the same time not be criminalized and be embraced in this country, in this state, in this county.
You've been working, you had conversations, you said, with DA Lisa Green, and you've also met, you said, with candidates, both Scott Spielman and Cindy Zimmer.
So our staff has had conversations and meetings with Lisa Green, particularly on the U visas. And we want to applaud Lisa Green for taking a stance, even though the sheriff, there was 464 requests for a U visa sign, and he has signed off 4 between 2012 and 2016, that she started taking up the slack and of signing off on these, because that means every person that gets a sign off is attached to a family. And those families, it adds up. There's thousands of families that are impacted by these signing off, being able to have protection and being able to stay. So we have had conversations with Lisa on that element. The one element that we've been able to talk to about with our candidates is the Office of Independent Review. So we know that
regarding police shootings.
around police shootings with the sheriff's departments and the BPD. Currently, the sheriff's department and the BPD investigate themselves. So essentially, they have a board of officers that investigate people that they're going to barbecues with, that they're doing baptisms with, and hanging out, reviewing. And I came from the neighborhood. I came from East Bakersfield. I don't want my homeboys to go to jail. I don't want my friends to go to jail. So, I'll probably do whatever I need to do to make sure that doesn't happen. We need something that's fair, that's objective, that requires civilian and law enforcement to come together. And a level, we know that the DA has started to do investigations of these shootings, but they're not doing their own investigating. They're just investigating the investigation that BPD and sheriffs have always done. And there hasn't been one incident where they held an officer accountable for misconduct, excessive force, or for one of these shootings have been charged, right? So she said, or the candidates both said that it's an issue of funding. Like they don't have enough funding to do this. But I've seen time and time again where, there's special investigations where they're investigating, whether it's the weed wars, whatever it is. They always find the money when it's important for them to put forward for these investigations.
So this is one of the things you guys are asking.
These are one of the
candidates
things
is to find money, or you're going to help find the money. Is that what you're suggesting?
Actually, we have a canvas this Saturday where we're going to be out talking to the community, and we're going to be talking in specific districts, city council districts, about the need for Office of Independent Review. That all we're asking for, we're not against law enforcement. We know they have a job to do. But at the same time, with the track record that law enforcement had here with the Guardian identifying us as America's deadliest police force in 2015, we have a long way to go to build trust, and that's for the first time. My aunt lived here for 60 years, and I asked her, Thea Mary Lou, when was there a time that there was ever trust between communities of color and law enforcement? She goes, Mijo, there's never been trust between a community of color and law enforcement. So we're talking about something we're building for the very first time. So it's a great opportunity, and I applaud the efforts that folks are making, what Lau Martin is trying to make. But at the same time, it's a unilateral decision that are all being made by the police department without a table, a multi-organizational that are levying some of these changes and transformation that need to happen to build real relationship and build real trust. And some of that happens with holding officers accountable. We have a framework, it's called the HEAT framework, hiring more officers of color. 85% of BPD is white, not reflecting the communities that they're policing. Equipment, that they're not militarizing their equipment, that they're using body cams, and we applaud the sheriff for implementing body cams in Wasco and for rolling them out more in a more intentional way now in Kern County. Accountability, that involves officer independent review. Officers are held accountable just like you and me if we commit a crime in the community, and the same consequences, not investigated by themselves, but an independent board of citizens and retired law enforcement. And then around training. You know, the law enforcement is under investigation by the California Department of Justice. And right now, they have a program called Principal Policing. Our director of Pico, California, Reverend Ben McBride, has helped build this in Oakland with the Department of Justice. We need that type of training that has a community element and an accountability piece in it. So we think with that aspect, the HEAT approach, that we'd be able to do that.
All right. Well, Joey, thank you so much for joining us on In the 661.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us as well on In the 661, Youth Voices for Kern.